Okay, so I'm doing my presentation over Salvage the Bones by Jesymn Ward. Um, and so first I want to talk about um, just my thoughts on the book. It's definitely something that I've never read before, obviously, and it's definitely has a. I mean, it's weird, but like in a good way. Like a lot of things, there's so many twists and turns that I don't really know how to explain or like I guess just like think of. I'm honestly really kind of surprised at the novel just because the way that Jesymn Ward writes, she writes her characters as very real people, and there's the sad thing is like the situation that like Ash Randall Jr. and like her family and like their friends are living in, like that's real. Like people really do experience that like here in America. Kind of like in class when we were discussing living in a third world country or third world. Hold on, I wrote it down. Being living in a fast growing, high economic country, but then having people live in poverty, just as we see here in Salvage the Bones. Um, so, um, just back on just like some knowledge about um, Jesymn Ward, I found an interview that she did in 2017 where she actually went back to where she was from, which is I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Delisle. Anyway, Mississippi, which is it's her town is off the Gulf Coast, and it's very rural, and there's not many people that live there. And so in this interview that she does, she returns home and gives the lady a tour of her where she used to live and where she grew up at. And so not only does like Jesymn Ward talk about like just her growing up, but she also talks about why she's raising her kids in like that area, even though like she it's almost like she does want to raise them there, but she doesn't want to raise them there. So here's a quote from it. It says Ward at 40 has chosen to return to Delisle and raise her children there despite her profound ambivalence about what the town represents. So Ward loves where she grew up and like she has a special connection there, but at the same time that there's so much history that she faced as an African American woman, but that has been there way before she got there because of like the history of living under Jim Crow laws, slavery, and like sharecroppers. And so then later, as the interview goes on, Ward is in the car and she's giving a tour to the lady, and they go past Ward's grandmother's house where she actually lived there with 12 of her family, like 12 other family members, at one point in time. So it seemed like Ward, she did obviously. I mean, the town was. It's kind of like, I mean, like here in Macon we see poverty, but I guess it's on a different level. Um, a lot of these people that live here are not here, but in Mississippi, it's a town that they work blue collar jobs. They work in factories. They do like oil rigging or just very blue collar jobs. And so then in the article, there's a picture of a local coffee shop, and it has writers from Mississippi like Eudora Welty and Faulkner on there, where now Ward's book is on the shelf along with the other Mississippian writers. Um, I think it's really interesting that Ward she dreamed of growing up and writing stories and being alongside with these other famous writers. She says, or well, this is what the lady had written in her article. She said, this year, Ward's portrait was added to the state's literary map, which strikes her as both thrilling and surreal. Ward said, in high school, I would look at the map, and here's Faulkner, and here's Welty, and here's Richard Wright. I think a part of me always dreamed or asked, what if? What would it be like to be on that map one day? So we see that a lot of these stories by Eudora and then Faulkner and Richard Wright, they all tell the stories of, in some shape or form, of African Americans. And so I think that Ward, the way she writes her characters so truthfully and honestly, and like in this decrepit society, is just so she can show the truth, like not hide like what people don't want to see, you know. Um, so furthermore about her parents, her dad worked a blue collar job, just like in a factory job, just to make ends meet, and then her mother was a maid, and she worked for people and attending to their houses, and they often lived off food stamps in order to just live and eat. Um, so the way that Jesymn Ward was able to like get her education and go on to the University of Michigan and Stanford and write her novel and everything is her mother worked. She ended up working for a very wealthy family, um, where then the family actually offered to pay um, her mother and pay for Jesymn Ward to go to a private Episcopal school. And so that was how Jesymn Ward was able to further her education and then go to the University of Michigan and then go on to Stanford. And she was one of the first people in her family to actually go to college and graduate. Okay, and then for the next part, in my selected text, I chose from page 117. So it says, we walk past Big Henry's incongruously narrow shotgun house, Marquise's small pink house, which has only 3 windows and sits in a yard so clustered with azalea, seems like one more faded flower. Rich boy Franco's house is green, and for some reason, someone in his family has painted the bottom 2 feet of the tree's trunks in his yard white. Some older boys named Joshua and Christoph have a blue-gray house with a screened porch alongside with bougainvillea grown to riot under the oaks in the yard. And then there was Muda Mound's yellow house, faded to tan, choked with wisteria. Manny's trailer is on the other side of Beau Sauvage, away from this side of the neighborhood. The small Catholic church, the haphazard cemetery, skeeter mode, the county park with a dirt parking lot which strives to impose some order, some civility to Beau. It fails. So then the rest of the it just goes on to talk about how obviously this community is not taken care of. Nobody tends to anything. It's just let it all grown up, and it's just poor. And so throughout reading this novel, even not like the pit we see is dark and nasty and gross. So where her family live, it is very poor. It's very filled with poverty. These kids are malnourished. So one of the articles that I found, this guy, Christopher Clark, he analyzes the set and the pit and like the environment where they live at. And so he makes a connection of how like the environment that they live in is how that affects their livelihood. So we see that there's nothing there in Beau Savage and in the pit for them to do, like to live off of. Like there's no like steady source of income. And so the label that we find like of like poor African Americans, like what Etch and her family are, like that's real. Like that's a real narrative. And so I really found this interesting quote that he said. It said, Boy Savage, or Savage Woods, also reflects the doubleness of natural realms and their subsequent qualities. The flip side of a nurturing Mother Nature is a darker, more dangerous proposition, whereby the natural is capable of taking away as well as providing resources. Coupled with the sociological conditions deeply entrenched in the southern Mississippi landscape, Boy Savage becomes a marker for both natural and cultural hardships the residents face. So we see that this area has been inherited by Etch and her family. And it's always like that. It's been in her family just as much as the pit has been in her family, which is where they've all lived. On page 58 it says, the house is a drying animal skeleton. Everything inside that was an evidence of living salvaged over the years. So we see that not only is this town poor, but the location is awful. And um, Clark uses the nature, and we think of Mother Nature as being really pretty and just offering so many beautiful opportunities and like landscapes, but instead we see here that Mother Nature has actually taken its darkest and deepest side and has people living in that. Um, we see that the pit is a reflection of the repulsive living situation that the family's in. Junior and Etch eat Vienna sausages, raw ramen noodles, and all these kids are malnourished. And so, just being malnourished does not mean that they're skinny, but it means like that they're not getting the amount of energy they need and calories and everything that they need to survive in order to live a healthy, stable life. Like these, when Skeeta gets like scarred in his side, he doesn't have any band-aids or bandages. What he does is he cleans it out with peroxide, and he reuses the same rag that he used the first time when it was bleeding. So there is no way, like nature, this is what nature has handed them, and this is what they have to live in. Like, it seems that there's no way for them to escape where the universe and nature has placed them at. But overall, I really enjoyed this novel. I definitely would like to read it again and just see what I can notice the next time. But I think that naturalism can be incorporated into this as well, showing like how nature is unforgiving as like Hurricane Katrina slowly starts to approach, and how like the forces, it's almost like the forces of the world are against this family. And so I think that was just an interesting way to look at the novel, and just to approach it.